Welcome to this series on Hatha Pradeepika, a wonderful text written, compiled and edited almost about 600 years back. As we all know that the contribution to the entire world in the field of yoga goes to India, and it is our responsibility, in fact it's our duty, to maintain its purity, to maintain its perfection, and to propagate, to preserve as a science of transforming one's life, as a science to build up one's personality, as a social science to eradicate the imbalances in various dimensions of the society. Yes, yoga plays that role. It's not just an individual who practices gets changed. It's not just an individual who experiences the effects of yoga gets transformed. The practice of yoga, the teaching of yoga, intrinsically, spontaneously, automatically instills and builds in the practitioner a sense of contribution to the society, a sense of supporting the social balances. The practitioner of yoga will be a contributor in maintaining the peace and harmony in the society. He will not be exploiting the social inequalities. In fact, he will be a bridge, a foundation in building up a harmonious, peaceful society. This is very important to note that yoga practice is not an individualistic, personalized, individual practice. It is a science by which one is made to contribute, one is made to transform, to recognize his or her role, part in the entire vast circle of environment. And this is exactly what is the science of yoga, yoga vidya, yoga shastra, yoga abhyasa brings it, should bring it. If it is not happening, we cannot find fault with the yoga shastra, we cannot find fault with the yoga vidya, but we can definitely find out the faults in the yoga abhyasa. And the need to correct yoga abhyasa, the need to orient the yoga abhyas, and also need to orient the way of teaching the yoga. As we see nowadays, yoga is becoming, or almost has become, an industry, a commercial factories. Many of the yoga classes are all commercial factories. And it has become tool for an employment. Yoga has become a udyoga, where a person, while earning money, is fulfilling his physical and mental needs, not the basic needs, the wants, the desires. And that is where there is a need to reorient learning and teaching of yoga. Yoga prasikshana, yoga sikshana, and yoga abhyasa. In the same direction, out of the various available yoga shastras, yoga texts, the leading, the most important, in fact, the base and the foundation of the entire yoga practices, we find a wonderful book, a wonderful text, Hatha Pradeepika. As it is said that it is a text which was written by, authored by, or compiled by Swatma Ramasuri, Yogi Swatma Ramasuri. It is traced that he belongs to Dakshinapatha. More specifically, the Andhra. And Yogi Swatma Ramasuri has compiled, stitched together the various techniques, methods, procedures and practices which were prominent around 600 years back. It is his great tapasya, it is his great contribution to put all of them in a series of practices, giving it into a shape, a prescription, something like a syllabus for yoga practice, a syllabus for yoga teaching. And this is what the great yogi Swatmarama Suri has done. We find number of books published, various printed copies which are available with the title Hatha Yoga Pradeepika. Hatha Yoga Pradeepika. But we will be surprised to know that the title of the book itself is wrong. Why? Because Yogi Swatmarama Suri himself mentions the name of his text as Hatha Pradeepika and not Hatha Yoga Pradeepika. How this yoga got inserted, we do not know. But maybe, as we find Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, similarly, Hatha Yoga is there. But the text name is Hatha Pradeepika and not Hatha Yoga Pradeepika. And as a bird's eye view of introduction, it's necessary to understand that Swatmarama in Hatha Pradeepika mentions and proposes, expounds Hatha Yoga as a base, as a beginning, as a foundation, as a starting point. And the end, the fruit and the final of the Hatha Yoga, the result of the Hatha Yoga, the goal of the Hatha Yoga, the final fruit of the Hatha Yoga is Raja Yoga. He mentions it and he stresses this particular point in the second lesson. Yes, second lesson it is. Hatha Pradeepika has 4 lessons, like Bhagavad Gita has 18 adhyayas. Patanjali Yoga Sutra has 4 padas. Hatha Pradeepika has 4 lessons. They are named beautifully as Upadesha. First lesson is Prathama Upadesha. The second one is Dvitiya Upadesha. And the third is Tritiya Upadesha. Of course, the last one is the Chaturtha Upadesha. Upadesha it is. It is a teaching. And it is a learning. It is a lesson. As a teacher teaches to the student, a lesson is taught. That means the lesson was already there. That's why it is called as Upadesham. And of course, there are 4 Upadeshas, 4 lessons. And of course, some of the texts and manuscripts, the research scholars have found out that there is a 5th one, which essentially deals with various ailments, curing out of it, and various applications of the practices which were elaborated in these 4 lessons. Something like a concerning with the yoga therapy, yoga chikitsa it is. But the first Upadesha, the second Upadesha, the third Upadesha, and the last, the 4th Upadesha, Swatmarama specifically maintains that it is a graded order. It's a graded stepwise growth. Means the teachings in the second lesson have to be practiced after the first lesson. The third lesson's practices are to be taken up after the first and the second are over. And the last one has to be after the previous 3. It means the first lesson means the methods, the techniques and the practices elaborated in the first lesson forms the basis for the second lesson. And similarly, the second forms the basis for the third, and the third forms the basis for the 4th. We should also remember, once the second forms the basis for the third, the already first one was included in that. When the third becomes the basis for the 4th, already first and second were the part of it. So it is a comprehensive, continuous and inclusive growth, inclusive practices. And of course, lot of rules, various restrictions, various concepts, many of the ideas for the practice and teaching available nowadays as on the day, all have mostly references to the Hatha Pradeepika. That is a great contribution of Yogi Swatmarama Suri. The first lesson is on the asanas, and the second lesson is on pranayama. But we should remember, Swatmarama, the yogi, uses the word kumbhaka and not pranayama. So the second lesson is on kumbhaka. The third lesson is on the mudras. The last and the final lesson is on the types of nada anusandhana. It is nada anusandhana. So the first lesson, the practice and the teachings connected to the asanas, asana abhyasa, is a preliminary basic foundation for the practice of the kumbhakas. And that becomes the basic foundation and the prerequisite for the mudras. And that becomes a step for the Nadanusandhana. That means in mudras, or mudras include asana and kumbhaka or pranayama, and Nadanusandhana combines, includes asana, pranayama, that is kumbhaka, and the mudras. In the entire 4 lessons, as it is popularly known as Chaturanga Yoga, the 4-limbed yoga, the first one is the first lesson, Prathamopadesha, on the asanas. Yogi Swatmarama elaborates about 15 asanas. The second lesson is on the 8 kumbhakas, Ashta Kumbhaka, Vidhi and Labha, and 10 mudras in the Tritiya, the third lesson, the Vidhi, the Abhyasa and the Phala. And the last one about the Nadanusandhana. 4 types of Nadanusandhana we find in this. And that is how Hatha Pradeepika lays down the basic structure of practice and teaching of yoga. And though Yogi Swatmarama Suri mentions Hatha Yoga as a beginning to enter and to practice Raja Yoga, and Hatha Yoga culminates into Raja Yoga at a particular stage. As we see when we go through the text, the yogi takes a stand that there is no difference between Hatha Yoga and the Raja Yoga. They are same. And in fact, Swatmarama brings about a beautiful, a wonderful synthesis of the both traditions of Hatha Yoga. The famous traditions of Hatha Yoga, as we all of us know, that it is a tradition followed by the Munis and the tradition followed by the Yogis. The Munis tradition is the tradition of philosophical dimension. The Tattva and the tradition followed by the Yogis is the practical dimension. The philosophy, principles, ideals of Hatha Yoga of the Munis, Vidhi Abhyasa, practices, procedures and methodologies of the yogis. Swatmarama wonderfully synthesizes. In the Hatha Pradeepika, we also find, apart from the asanas and the pranayama, we also find beautifully the Shatkriyas, their benefit, their effects. And of course, Swatmarama synthesizes the traditionally available pranayama methods. Sagarbha pranayama and agarbha pranayama. Sagarbha, as we know, it is along with the mantra, and agarbha is without the mantra. Means when we chant a particular mantra and perform the pranayama, or when pranayama is synchronized with mantra, or mantra chanting is synchronized with pranayama, when they go parallel, it is sagarbha. And if there is no relationship and the pranayama is practiced without any connection, without any help of the mantra, as we all know, it is called as the agarbha pranayama. Swatmarama synthesizes both. In the Hatha Pradeepika, we also find yamaniyamas, which are different, mentioned in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And in Hatha Pradeepika, we find that mitahara is part of the yamaniyamas, which is not in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And of course, various books, various texts on Hatha Yoga, which we find available in those times or even the later texts, have their base roots in Swatmarama's yogis, Hatha Pradeepika. And Hatha Pradeepika has a very wonderful dimension where the Nadanusandhana is described, explained as Samadhi itself. So Nadanusandhana of Hatha Pradeepika is what is Samadhi in Maharshi Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. We find the qualities explained are similar, same. And the philosophical dimension of Hatha Pradeepika explained by Yogi Swatmarama is also very close to the philosophical dimension of Jiva, Ishvara, Paramatma, and the various concepts in the Advaita philosophy, Vedantic philosophy. And that is how Hatha Pradeepika has a philosophical seeds of Advaita Vedanta. And various mudras also, or the reflections as the practitioners of the higher dimensions of the mind and the chitta. And of course, Hatha Pradeepika was also referred in other texts. The shlokas from the Hatha Pradeepika are also quoted in other texts. the Goraksha Siddhanta Sangraha, and of course various other texts, which shows that they were not only influenced, but they are later texts than the Hatha Pradeepika. And the Hatha Pradeepika itself has about 409 verses put into these 4 lessons. And various shlokas quoted in other texts as from Hatha Pradeepika. Some of those shlokas are not found by the research scholars in original Hatha Pradeepika text. This also shows that Swatmarama Suryogi might have dropped those shlokas or might have composed and edited the text. And this is how Hatha Pradeepika is a wonderful text which gives an elaborate foundation, in fact a strong foundation for various practices which are prevalent in present day. And as we see that nowadays all practices, whether it is asana, pranayama, mudras, kriyas, bandhas, and the way it is practiced by the various institutions, universities, and ashrams, and various individuals, they are all the shades and have roots in the Hatha Pradeepika. And that is the important dimension which we see in the Hatha Pradeepika text, where Yogi Swatmarama Suri stood apart from all the rishis and munis of his times and of his earlier times. We also know that yoga as a science, as a practice, as a method, yoga abhyasa, yoga shastra, yoga marga was available from time immemorial. And Swatmarama Suri's Hatha Pradeepika in this 15th century is a turning point. The 5 lessons, the 5 Upadeshas of the Hatha Yoga Pradeepika are like this. The first lesson is named by Yogindra Swatmarama Suri as the Asana Vidhi Kathanam, the name of the first lesson, which contains 67 shlokas. Asana Vidhi Kathanam. And the second lesson, second Upadesha, is named as the Pranayama Vidhi Kathanam, which contains 78 shlokas. Pranayama Vidhi Kathanam. The third Upadesha, the third lesson of the Hatha Pradeepika by Swatmarama Suri is the one on the mudras. It is named as Mudra Vidhinam, Mudra Vidhanam, Mudra Vidhanam Nama Tritiyopadeshaha. That is the third one, which contains 126 shlokas. The fourth one contains the last one contains 114 114 shlokas, and it is named as Samadhi Lakshanam. Samadhi Lakshanam. And the last one, the fifth Upadesha, is the one which contains the smallest number of shlokas, only 24 shlokas, and they are named, the lesson is named as the, very nicely he has named it, it is named as Aushadha Kathanam Nama. Aushadha Kathanam. Yoga, Chikitsa, Yoga, therapy side. So the first one 67 shlokas, the second one 78 shlokas, third one 126 shlokas, the fourth one 114 shlokas, and the last one is the 24 shlokas. The total comes into the 409 shlokas. The four Upadeshas are termed as the Chaturanga Yoga, and the last one is an additional one, which is the Aushadha Kathanam Nama. So let us conclude this session here and continue our understanding of the Hatha Pradeepika in our future sessions. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.